Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Barriers and Boundaries, Resilience, Leadership, your personal and or organizational resilience podcast. We are back, and I'm actually pretty excited about this episode today, and I want to talk about the importance of healthy boundaries, both in a personal and an organizational context. I know sometimes I flip-flop 1 week talking about personal boundaries and the next organizational, but I think this one, the analogy that you're going to hear about today does actually have implications for both personal and organizational. And I want to start just by talking over a few things of the importance of having what we're going to call healthy boundaries, but for this podcast, we're going to call them ceiling tiles, and we'll get into that in just a minute. But the importance of having that resilient mindset and the importance of having healthy boundaries in place. And I think it's important that we don't underestimate what healthy boundaries can actually do from us from the standpoint of managing everyday stress, preventing minor issues from becoming overwhelmed. They also help us recognize our limits because they signal when you're reaching your limits. We know when we're up against ourselves sometimes. And I know when I was younger, I was just telling a friend of mine this. When I was younger, I used to get in my own way a lot. I still do sometimes, but not as much as I did when I was younger. Thankfully, because of those boundaries that kind of prompt necessary action that kind of protects my well-being. Another thing healthy boundaries do is they help prevent burnout. And we're going to talk about burnout today. Ensuring that you don't overextend yourself, you allow adequate time for rest and recovery. And in the organizational context, particularly, trust and respect. Those are huge things that create a stable and positive work environment that enhances our overall resilience abilities and capabilities, ensuring kind of that long-term well-being and success in our workplace. So let's get into it. The other day, I was in an office with a safety inspector, and one of the office rooms we were looking at and inspecting, it was lacking multiple ceiling tiles. There were so many gaps. Even the ceiling tiles that were there had holes, they were broken, and it just didn't look right. But she made a point to highlight how big of an issue that was. I'm like, yeah, that doesn't look great at all. It's not really appealing to work in an office like this. And she really quickly corrected me on it not being an aesthetic thing. She made a point to bring awareness to the role that ceiling tiles play. So let's dive into this I believe this is a powerful analogy. It just kind of came out of nowhere, but I believe it beautifully illustrates the importance of healthy boundaries in building resilience. And I bet you did not see that coming. So ceiling tiles, neatly arranged above your head, they play a crucial role in the building safety system, particularly in conjunction with water sprinklers. Ceiling tiles are, often overlooked. They're an essential part because although they might seem like single components meant to hide wiring or give it a clean look, as she described to me, it's not just aesthetics, but these tiles are designed to withstand a certain amount of heat and pressure. And when that heat and pressure become too intense, the pressure from that heat forces the water sprinklers to work. Now, why is this important? Water sprinklers are installed to respond to fires and releasing water to extinguish the flames and prevent the fire from spreading. However, these sprinklers don't activate at just the first sign of warmth. They need a significant amount of heat and pressure to trigger their response. So the ceiling tiles act as a buffer, and they're managing the environment until the situation reaches a critical point where intervention is necessary. let's translate this into our personal and professional lives. So think about yourself as a building. Your mind and body are the infrastructure, and you have these ceiling tiles that represent your healthy boundaries. Now, these boundaries are in place to manage stress, protect your well-being, help you function under normal conditions optimally. But what happens when the heat is on, metaphorically speaking, when stress, when challenges, conflicts arise, your boundaries, like ceiling tiles, help manage these pressures. They keep things in check. They are able to prevent you from becoming overwhelmed. However, if the pressure or stress becomes too intense, then you're going to need a resource. Just like the office that's on fire needs water, so does our psyche need resources that are the boundaries that are helping us move forward. This highlights why we need to understand ourselves. We need to know how much pressure we can withstand without help from others. And then we also need to identify what is our ceiling tiles that are going to ensure that our safety measures are activated when they're needed. So that's a crucial element to healthy boundaries, and often, the signal that you need to take action, you need to listen to it, you need to respond to it. Just as the tiles help the build-up pressure signal to the sprinklers to activate. When your boundaries are breached, it's time to deploy your water sprinklers, which could be internal or external. You might need to seek support from someone else. You might need to take a break. You might need to employ some sort of coping mechanism to help you manage those situations. And healthy boundaries like these ceiling tiles help you recognize and acknowledge when the heat is too much to handle on your own. They prevent burnout and ensure you respond effectively to stress. And without these boundaries, you might not realize you're reaching your limit until it's too late. Just as a building without ceiling tiles or an office space without ceiling tiles would allow a fire to spread unchecked before any sprinklers could respond. Now, what happens then is the whole building is now on fire, and you end up losing more than just one space. With mental or emotional fires that happen, it's easy to think that one mental space or emotional space isn't all that is on fire. I've seen this more times than not. When one aspect of a person's life is failing or struggling, there is a belief that other parts of their lives are burning as well. And there might be some truth to that. However, just because you lose your job, it doesn't also mean your spouse is going to leave you. But there is something to the idea that negativity breeds negativity. Some start to see so many negative things in our lives, partially because they are intentionally, whether subconsciously or not, they are looking for negative things. In essence, those ceiling tiles and water sprinklers, they illustrate the dynamic relationship between boundaries and resilience, because boundaries help you manage day-to-day stresses and recognize when it's time to activate more significant responses to protect yourself. And this balance is what fosters true resilience, allowing you to navigate challenges without being overwhelmed and without the burnout. One of the most common mistakes about having a resiliency plan, about having healthy boundaries, is to think that we're not going to have any pressure. We're not going to have any heat in our lives. We're not going to have a buildup of those things in our lives. But that's not true. We're always going to have pressure. We're always going to have some sort of stress. There's eustress, there's distress, but there's always going to be some sort of stress and pressure and heat happening in our lives. And it's why we need healthy boundaries, is to help us mitigate, the expansion of those fires into other spaces, but we can put those out. And fires being things like stress in our lives. So the next time you look up at a ceiling, remember the invisible but powerful role that those tiles play, and let it remind you of the importance of setting and maintaining healthy boundaries in your own life. I believe, like most things, that we can find the profound among the simple. And this analogy, for example, I believe is kind of profound, but it was just something from a simple everyday part of my life that it just took someone pointing it out. And like all of a sudden it just clicked. I was like, that's like a healthy boundary. So my posture has been to look for ways to talk about resilience in new ways. And, when I have that mindset, an analogy like this just kind of comes about. And that's kind of what I'm saying about negativity. When my posture is towards negativity in one aspect of my life, I'm going to start to see negativity in other aspects. But if I posture myself for resilience mentally, emotionally, then I'm going to start to see ways to be resilient mentally and emotionally. And again, that's kind of the goal. That's what healthy boundaries are kind of for. So one of the things I wanted to do before I close up is just kind of recognizing the need for boundaries, because, we may not always recognize the signs that we've hit too much pressure if we don't have something to automatically activate that will help protect us. So there are a few signs, I guess you could say, that boundaries are needed. If you are constantly feeling overwhelmed or stressed and you feel like you don't have any relief from that, you might feel anxious or overburdened. I think that's a clear sign that you should talk to someone about some boundaries being established in your life. Another one is resentment. If you start feeling resentful towards others for their demands of your time or your energy, I think that's a signal that some boundaries are being crossed, or maybe you don't have boundaries and they're taking too much. There's nothing to protect you. And I think the third sign that I would recommend, I was kind of thinking about this, is exhaustion. Just that frequent feeling that you're burnout and you're physically or emotionally like exhausted. I think that's a good indicator that you're overextending yourself, and you might need some boundaries to kind of help protect you from doing too much and going too far. Mentally, emotionally, it's the same way we get exhausted physically when we work out too hard and we do too much. I think we do that mentally as well. I think that should be probably its own podcast episode, which, now I'm thinking about it, might be a good next episode to discuss. But I think it's important to recognize those needs for healthy boundaries. So obviously worth talking with someone else about, if it's a friend, if it's a counselor, if it's a therapist, just someone in your life that you trust and you feel like you can be open with, and really kind of highlight some of these things that you're feeling and experiencing in itself. Some other areas that you might identify needing boundaries is personal relationships with family, friends, significant others, coworkers. Are there areas where you feel you are taken for granted? That could be an area that requires a boundary. Your work environment, when you evaluate your workload, your working hours, your interactions with colleagues, are you overcommitting? Are you unable to say no? Those are the types of questions that you want to ask in the area of needing boundaries, or anything that has gone kind of past a healthy point. And then one final area is the area of self-care. Reflect on how much time you allocate to self-care activities. Are you prioritizing your well-being? I've said this a ton in counseling, that the best thing you could do, the best you could be for your spouse, for your job, whoever it may be, is the best version of yourself. And that requires knowing yourself, taking care of yourself, and, practicing self-care. I believe self-care isn't selfish. I think it's just really kind of affirming the strongest aspects of who you are so you can give the best of who you are to others when you need to. Because leadership looks a lot like service. And it's, I don't think it's selfish to want to offer your best self if it's for the good of someone else or for a bigger purpose that you might have identified. So once you recognize those needs, you've seen those areas where they're needed, I did want to highlight specifically how the ceiling tiles analogy plays into organizational resilience. Now, trust in an organization functions like our ceiling tiles. It creates a safe environment where employees feel secure to express their ideas, share concerns, take risk, be more inclusive. This trust manages the everyday heat of workplace challenges. It also prevents minor issues from escalating into major issues or problems. The ceiling tiles maintain a stable environment, and trust keeps the workplace running smoothly under normal conditions, right? And respect, on the other hand, I see that as the water sprinklers. When situations reach a critical point, respect ensures that responses are appropriate and effective. If there's too much heat on how little, or if there's conflict because of how little trust there is amongst teammates, amongst colleagues, then that water sprinkler is almost like a value that the organization would have, like respect. We will respect our colleagues. That's the protective measure. That's, trust being a healthy boundary. Hey, we're gonna focus on building trust. And in that, respect allows for constructive feedback and healthy communication, which are essential when the pressure is high. Just like the water sprinklers activate to control a fire, respect in the workplace activates to manage and resolve high-stress situations. So respect functions as our water sprinklers. When the situations reach a critical point and you need an appropriate and effective response, respect triggers mechanisms for conflict resolution, fair treatment, support for one another. Respect allows for constructive feedback and that healthy communication that we talked about. So there is this interplay of trust and respect, like ceiling tiles and water sprinklers, crucial for organizational resilience. Now, there's a lot more traits, characteristics, values. There's a lot more interplay, but I think trust and respect are pretty important. Probably the two of the bigger, most important ones that we could have. So that's why I'm using them here. But take that back to your workplace. Use this as a team building exercise. It's like, hey, ceiling tiles protect, they allow for the pressure to be built up to activate the resource. What are the things that we use in our office space to handle the pressure and the conflict and the tension, and what is that protective measure? It could be, conflict resolution skills, all that stuff. But there's an interplay, at least with trust and respect, and that's crucial for the organizational resilience, because you have something like trust that sets the foundation, creates a stable environment, while respect ensures that when the heat is on, the organization can respond effectively to those challenges, to when the environment is not stable. So together they foster organizational resilience and organizational culture where both employees and the organization can be more successful and can thrive. So by recognizing the roles of trust and respect as the boundaries and response mechanisms in your workplace, you can better appreciate how these elements contribute to overall resilience. So as you think about setting and maintaining healthy boundaries, remember the critical roles that trust and respect play in keeping your organization strong and responsive. So thanks for listening to this little analogy and this kind of segment on just the importance of there are moments where pressure is going to happen. There are moments where fires are going to happen. But don't let it freak you out, because when you have healthy boundaries, that's going to activate mechanisms that's going to help you respond to those. And the biggest thing I would say is just that mindset of like, how can I learn from this? And just keeping that attitude towards growth, keeping that attitude towards, okay, what have I learned about myself from this pressure? What do we learn about our organization from dealing with pressure? And I think one of the things in the organizational context that I see a lot is sometimes you have the wrong person in the wrong role, and you might actually need to fire somebody, pun intended, right? But you might need to let them go. You might need to have a different manager in place, someone that can actually be the person that activates when there's too much pressure. Some people simply don't know how to lead, and they don't know how, to allow a certain amount of pressure to happen before they're activated. They might be a faulty sprinkler. So just something to think about, something I see a lot, and it does kind of bother me just because I'm very adamant that healthy employees create healthy organizations, as we've talked about a billion times on this podcast. But it really comes down sometimes to just having the right person in the right role, in the right job, doing the right thing, and being able to be that person. So, okay, I appreciate you listening. Please share, please discuss this, please use it to your own free will of how to help become more personal resilient, or even just how to allow your organization to become more resilient. That is all I want for you. That's my goal for you. That's my dream for you. It's what I'm passionate about for you, and really just being able to develop and grow, because I think there's just so much more we can do than just live day to day in the mundane. So again, thank you so much for listening, and until next time, EB out.